Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Bitovi training, JavaScript training. My name is Justin Meyer, and today we've got a very short and quick lesson today on element attributes and properties. Alexis might be joining us later, and if this one I seem a little bit out of it and slow, it's because I just had a kid last week, so I'm very tired, but I'm looking forward to going through how elements have special properties and attributes that you can read from and get in set and do sometimes magic things, and there's a little bit of quirks in there that we're gonna talk about. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and get started. So like always, we have our Gitter chat room where you can ask questions related to these trainings. And, oh, thank you for the congrats. And here, I can't help but brag here. Let me find, see if this is one. There she is, my daughter. So yeah, like I said, you can always talk to us reach out to us on the chat room, and then I'm going to be doing the live coding at this JS spin. Hey, there's Alexis. Hey, Alexis.
Hey, there we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. I couldn't get into the Hangout.
No worries. I was just giving the normal introduction. Here is where you can follow along, and I'll paste the URL in. I already have in the JS training, but if you're needing to read it and this is too small, it is JSspin.com/JANUYEKUBO and then /edit. So I'll be working in here, and all we're doing is filling out the attr function here. So let's take a look at this slide. So every DOM node has different properties and different attributes that you can read and write to. And confusingly, all or most properties or a lot of properties are attributes, and all attributes are properties. It's kind of weird that there's a difference, but we'll get into what the difference between an attribute and a property is. I guess let's get into it now. So let's take a little example page here. I'm going to open up a new JS spin. So I think this can be kind of confusing to people. So here I've got a div. I'm just going to remove everything else. And I'm going to say hello. I'm going to add, so there's an ID attribute with a out value, and I'm going to add a foo attribute with a bar value. Now if we look at that element, and we look, and here you can see there's a properties. And if you inspect an element and then you go to properties, you can actually see the different properties that are on that element. It's organized by properties that belong to different levels of that object's proto chain. So you can see here things that are on, if there's properties or values that are on the object, prototype object, they're listed here. Similarly, if there's things on the a div element, then they're like related to a div sorry, let me step back a little bit. So this element is a div, and here's the actual instance of the element itself. But then there's it inherits from HTML div element, which inherits from HTML element, which inherits from element, from node, from event target, and from object. And at each level of inheritance, there's different properties. And this organizes and groups those properties by their corresponding level of inheritance. Now, you'll see here there's this attributes object. There's an attributes property on an element that has all the different attributes that the element contains. But you'll notice that there's also these properties. There's an ID property on the element, and there's a class name property on the element. So it's kind of neat, but attributes are really like the thing. You can think of attributes as the things that are going to be listed in the actual HTML of the page. So the textual representation of the element, these are the attributes. So it has attributes for anything that you write here. So I think even if I were to write like style, color green, and then I would get that element. You can see there's a style attribute, just like there is a style property. But you can have properties for things that there are not styles, right? So there's, even if I didn't have an, I don't have a class, there's still a class name property here that's empty. So you can think of it as attributes can set, and well, one other thing I want to show is that attributes, I could get this div, I could change any of its attributes. I could change its ID here or its style with the get and set attribute. So if I do that, I can't actually get that element from here, right, Alexis? Unfortunately.
I don't know if you can do it from JSBin, but you could say, if you have it selected, you could say $0. It'll get the last referenced element in Chrome. But I'm not sure if it'll pick it out of JSBin. Yeah, $0. Yeah, it's not going to let you do it.
Yeah, I don't think that works. Let me see.
And you had it selected in the Elements tab, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has it. It does not have it. I wonder if I can.
You could do it. You should be able to do it from the console in JSBin, though.
Does it? Oh, it allows you to. Okay, there we go. That's fine. We'll use that. So we're going to get this div element called out. And if I write out.id, you can see I get back the ID. And if I read out.getAttribute ID, I get back out. Now, the interesting thing is if I set an attribute using this set attribute, I can change it to something else. I'll change it outside. Then if I were to do out.id, I get outside. Similarly, if I did out.id equals inside, now I were to read the attribute, it's inside. So some attributes, like ID, and are two-way bound to their property. So if I change the property, it'll change the attribute. And if I change the attribute, it'll change the ID. Those are like class name, the ID. I think the href is kind of two-way bound, but kind of not, which is confusing. I might circle back to that once we're done with the exercise. Style is largely two-way bound, but things that are not kind of your default properties that are already on every object, regardless if attributes were added in the HTML or not. Properties that aren't like that, like foo bar, are not, or attributes like that are not added as properties, meaning there is no out.foo. That's undefined, right? So just because I have a foo equals bar here does not mean a property is added, but a attribute is added. So let's quickly go through the methods, and then we'll do the exercise, and then we'll kind of come back and talk about why you use attributes and IDs, and when you should use an attribute, when you should use ID, and that kind of thing, like the practical implications of these things. So the DOM provides these it provides some basic properties like ID, class name, href, type on an input that you can get or set, and those are two-way bound to different attributes. But then you can also get or set any attribute with the get attribute, set attribute, and remove attribute methods. So jQuery has a attr method that allows you to get and set attributes on an element using the get and set methods here. So let's implement that, shall we?
Let's shall.
So here's a good place to pause if you are wanting to do this one on your own. If not, you can watch me do it in about 2 seconds. JS bin. That's one. There we go. Okay. So here's the attr method. This is similar to all of the other methods that, like val, that we've been writing. It's gonna take, instead of just a value to either set, or if there is no value, to read the current value. This is gonna take 2 arguments. The first is gonna be the attribute to set, which I'm gonna call attribute name. And the other is going to be the value of the attribute, which I'll call attr value. I'm going to turn off auto run. And I'm going to do the same kind of arguments check. So if arguments.length is greater than 1, that means we're trying to set this attribute value. So I'm going to go through each item in the collection. The elements. Actually, because this is jQuery, I get it the other way. I'm going to get the index and the element. And then to set, I'm simply just going to element I'm going to set the attr name to the attr value on that element. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to return this, return the original collection. So this will go through and set for every single element in the collection, set the attribute name to the attribute value. And then if we don't want to do that, that means we just want to get the first element in the collection's attribute name. So to do that, I'm just going to return this 0 and then get the attribute that is trying to be read. So that's it. Enter test passed. Cool. So now let's talk a little bit about why and when you use attributes. When you'll actually use jQuery's attr function or get and set attribute. So Alexis, when do you normally use attributes?
If I'm
I think
adding a
there's different, the way that
class,
I would,
go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I think the way that I would answer this question is like, there's different ways you do it in modern programming, and there's ways you used to use attributes.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. Attributes, with the introduction of how we approach with like CAN components or web components in different frameworks, has kind of give this new meaning to creating custom attributes. They're a lot more prominent. You can add a lot more rich functionality. When I hear that today, that's the first thing I think of. But before today, if I'm talking about setting attributes, I would. Commonplace is like dynamically adding to a class, perhaps a class string. So you have class equals some string, you could dynamically add to it or change it entirely. Or if you're adding some arbitrary HTML5 attributes, it's really common, especially if you're coming from like a JSP, ASP background. You want to store things in this client, you want to move things to this client side state management. You're going to use a lot of HTML5 attributes. Data hyphen foo equals whatever you want it to be.
What Alexis is saying, talking about 5 attributes, to be clear, you're just talking about data attributes.
Data attributes, I'm sorry, yes.
What Alexis means by that is, so if you write foo equals bar, that's actually, I think, considered invalid, even with HTML5, invalid HTML. But it works in every single browser and is totally, I mean, an HTML validator might complain to you, but I would never actually complain to you if there was a good reason for writing something like that. However, you can prefix any custom attribute with data dash. So here we have data dash foo. And then according to, I think, HTML5, this is valid HTML.
Correct. It'll attach a foo property to that object behind the scenes.
Does it really?
I believe so.
I did not know it did that.
Let me rephrase. At least it does in the specification, I believe.
Oh, really easy because like we use modern techniques where attributes you don't actually have to use too much anymore day to day. But let me see. You think they're? Hold on.
I might be incorrect in that, but I believe that's what it was.
It's undefined. It was. I actually didn't think there's any now. So jQuery will do special behavior. Like, and we didn't implement this in our version of Atter, but jQuery, if you have something like data foo like this, I think you with jQuery
will definitely do that.
You can just do out. Actually, what is? Let me add jQuery to this page. jQuery. Where's 2?
It's at the top. Yeah.
What? Hold on.
No, well, you want to say it's going to be $out.data and then .foo.
Oh,
it's going to be on
yeah, that's what it does. jQuery has a special data function that will get that. Does it also? Does it do the? Yeah, it converts that to an object too. So jQuery has a special data function that will look for data dash, like will look for an attribute named data dash whatever you put in here, and it will take that, and if it looks like JSON, it will try to convert that to a JavaScript object and return that for you. But that's special jQuery functionality. It has nothing to do with the DOM. As far as I know, I just thought data just behaves like a normal attribute, except that it's just valid HTML. But I could be wrong about that. But
yeah,
I think
I might be correct. I'm double checking. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong.
So, but what Alexis was saying, this is not with a modern framework. This was extremely common practice, is to, if you had some Ajax functionality, or you had something that like, or not non-Ajax, you had something that you had a button that someone wanted to click, and when they clicked, it would show add details or something, do some interactive behavior, and you needed like the data as data and not like embedded in HTML. It was a very common practice to say something like, you know, there's embedded data in here, which is going to be kind of annoying to do. I'm escaping my quotes correctly. I think that's escape, right? So it was a very common practice to have like PHP or Ruby on Rails or your back end. If this was some element in the page, like some message element that was being rendered, and when clicked, you wanted some data to be shown or done something with, people would often add this as an attribute to the element. This you should never, I mean, modern JavaScript tools, there's no real good reason ever to do something like this, but this is really common. So you might have some code that would, your JavaScript might look like.
Yeah, it was extremely common, especially if you're talking about a server-rendered system, because you typically want some Ajaxy behavior where you're temporarily storing state, and if you didn't have a mechanism like we do today with maps, models, etc. Yeah, James is right. It's stored in data sets. I didn't want to interrupt. It does add a property as HTML5 spec. But
Okay.
if you don't have a client-side mechanism like CanJS or whatever your weapon of choice happens to be, this was extremely common because it was a safe way to put arbitrary data on an element or associate it with an element without modifying the DOM in any way. Good catch, James.
What was that? Actually, well, let me get working with jQuery first, and then tell me how I would do this with using that data set. So I would data foo, and then I would do var data. I could alert data.message. So, well, actually, let me do it without jQuery's little hack way or trick way of doing it. It's not really a hack, but I would read the attribute as data-foo with kind of our version of the library. It would work the same way up to this point, and then I could do JSON.parse data. And then I could revert that this way. Dang it. I'm sure my escaping, it did not work right. What went wrong here? Why is that not escaping right? Okay, I'm going to just use single quotes and hopefully cheat, and it will work the way I want it to. I didn't escape anything. There we go. Okay, so now we got the hello world. So yeah, one way you might have used attributes in the past was to stick on data. You would read your attribute as a string. If they put JSON in here, you would convert that JSON to a normal object and then do something with that data. This was very common. No, you no longer have to do that. But what is the trick now for, what was that? How can I?
So you can say, if you wanted to access the elements for var data, you can say $out if you still want to find it with jQuery, and then you just get, the zero
first element
index, yeah, and then just .dataset, and that'll give you a collection of all the data attributes on there. So you can say .dataset.foo, basically. Dataset with a lowercase s, I believe. It's just all going to be Yeah.
Okay, and now
That should
this
be
I
cool.
can do.
I don't know if it actually parses your object. That's what I'm curious about to see what happens here.
Okay,
But I guess we'll find
so
out.
let's just put out data. I wonder if it. Okay, so that
So it just
is
doesn't parse the object.
that is dumb. If it doesn't actually convert to JavaScript, he's like, I don't get what the point of that is. If it, I mean, it's just like reading the. I must
It's
be.
an arbitrary collection of data properties, data hyphen properties.
Yeah.
There's no specification for like actually doing. They didn't take into account why we actually put stuff there. We don't just put strings all the time. So it's a really simple implementation.
Why provide that when get attribute already will do the exact same thing?
Because you can type dataset instead of at or data hyphen foo, man. Isn't that what cool people do? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Does it
Yeah,
serialize for you? Like if I do like,
I actually have the spec
let's
open.
say I
I
were to
don't think.
do here. Let's do. Okay, let's say we're to do the reverse. I got my out, and then I'm gonna do data set bar equals, and let's say I just set it to some object. Okay, and now let's look at the attributes. Okay. Oh no, that's so yeah. It's two-way bound, but then again, so James just wrote it's two-way bound, but it doesn't serialize like JSON string and incoming object. It just puts it as object object. So it's just the same as then doing set attribute stuff. So this is what the really. It's very confusing why they would do that. Like, I don't get it. Anywho, so the other common thing people use attributes for is sometimes people use the ID or the class name or the type of an. So if you were with jQuery creating an input element, and then wanted to change its type from radio. Does that work, actually? Let's see. It does work. Okay, cool. Let me get back to my code, though. Wow. Do that. Show it. Okay. So, in modern programming, again, like you rarely are building elements yourself and having to change their attributes on your own. And also, you can just set input.type to radio. So again, like attributes are just a rare thing to set on your own in modern programming, because if you do set things like, if there are some times you want to set an ID or a class name or things like that, well, then you should just be using the property. Input.type equals radio. Or jQuery provides a prop function, which we did not implement, which you should use to actually set type. So jQuery has this prop function that works just like, works very similar for get attribute, but it's designed to work for things that are property based. So instead of doing this, you should actually be writing this with jQuery. You should be using its prop function. So this is kind of a weird lecture because we're like, hey, let's write this attr function, which we do need for our tabs widget, because we're building the tabs widget very low level in a way that like you wouldn't normally write a tabs widget anymore. So in modern programming, the attr method you just don't use. I guess the conclusion. But it's good to learn, and
it's a good understanding. It's like you know, if we had a time machine and we went back to building things in like 2006 or 2007, it's good to know kind of where this all came from, or even to know why we have these abstractions, why we have jQuery, why we have CanJS. Why is there even more MB libraries being created today? It's just finding the right abstractions for this kind of stuff, because this stuff was kind of weird and heavy lifting in retrospect today with all the abstractions we have. At the time, this was very common.
Yeah, extremely common. I mean, you would set an ID, but it was even then, back in the day, you would set ID is to-do-5, right? Which you should still have been using the properties instead of the attribute method. But this thing was what was so common, where you would just tack on arbitrary data. So there's one other thing I did want to mention, because it is kind of interesting and can be useful, and definitely useful if you're building the tabs widget, so that it does, when you're building the tabs widget, is href, the href property versus the href attribute. So let's create a link here. And I'll go somewhere. Okay. So I might go somewhere link here, and let me get, I can just get all anchors. Now let me get the href of you'll notice it's what is written down here. But if I were to get the anchor again and read its href property, you'll notice it's JS bin. It's like the fully, it's a full URL. So this is kind of one interesting thing with some of these. Style is another good example of this, where the attribute is what's kind of in the page, but the property is like a special, it's like the fully normalized version of what the attribute represents. So this -- or / somewhere attribute really represents a URL that looks like this. So the property looks like this, even though the attribute looks like this. Similarly, style is just the same way, where if I write a style, and I did that color green, border solid 1 pix blue, maybe 2 pixels so you can see it, or 3 pixels so you can see it. So if I look at the style property, it's what I wrote. But, or sorry, if I look at the style attribute, it's what I wrote. But if I were to look at the style property, well, this is an object with all the different potential style properties that or style values that an element can have. And then if we look in here eventually, we should see somewhere like color is blue. Let me get to it. Or green, I mean, color is green. And we should be able to see the borders are set, right? So it kind of takes this raw value and then translates it into this values on this object. Now what's weird is, let's see what happens if I set the color to green. Or I'm going to set it to red, I mean. Now if I were to read my style, it's changed back to red. So I don't know how, well, I do kind of know how it works, but these things are kind of two-way bound. You change this object, it will update this. If you update this, it will change this object. Just like href, but it goes through some kind of translation layer both ways. Cool. So those are properties and attributes, and we're going to talk a lot more about style next week.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, next week will be good because we talk about style, we talk about how jQuery reads and writes styles, how the browser computes styles. But we're even going to talk a little bit about, I believe, layouts and offsets are next week too, or that might be.
I do. If I have, we should clean that slide up though. That slide is gross. It was a valiant attempt by myself to explain how layout works, but I still needs a lot of improvement. We'll see. Maybe we'll try it again and stumble through it, and hopefully, if not help other people, help us eventually figure out a way to articulate how the DOM lays out elements, which is very complex. It's one of those things that like I just know because I've seen it a million times, but I don't know how to explain it. It's like you know Michael Jackson sounds good, but I can't articulate the reasons why. Right? His music's awesome, but I can't explain why.
Can only articulate it through more dance.
Through more dance, or just being like, it's awesome, right? Like, it's great, it sounds good, it's fun to listen to. But I can't like be like, well, the placement of each beat coupled with his high voice, and you just can't. I lack the skills to articulate it because I don't have a music background. Anywho, all right. Well, that's it. I don't think there's any questions today, and then I guess we'll see everybody next week. Thanks, Alexis, for joining. And are you here next week, Alexis?
I am available next week, so I'll be in the podcast.
All right, great. I'm going to go to sleep. I told everybody I'm like very tired today because I had.
Oh, I will also go to sleep because it's the middle of the night.
It's the same time. All right, have a good night then.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
All right,
see you guys next week.